Everyone loves to listen to a good book, and there are so many wonderful ones to choose, so we decided to bring you this podcast of Stories Come to Life. Each episode features a story from either classic or modern literature, especially chosen to be interesting and exciting to hear. So sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Welcome to Stories Come to Life. I'm your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. Cress Delahanty is 13 years old in today's chapters. She has to navigate through the difficult time of her beloved grandmother's passing, as well as trying to be a comfort to her grandfather. Then, in late summer, she goes with her parents to the seaside village of Balboa, where she knows Edwin and his family are staying. Will they run into each other on the boardwalk? Cress certainly hopes so, as she has a new and very glorious hat, carefully prepared for the meeting. Now sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Cress Delahanty by Jessamyn West. Chapter 3. 13. Summer. Part 1. Grandfather picked up the bowl of pink, white, and red geraniums that Cress had so painstakingly arranged, walked to the kitchen door and gave them, flowers and bowl together, an energetic toss. He was a tall, strong man, and Cress heard the bowl splinter against the rocks that bordered the parsley bed at the far end of the yard. Then he went through the kitchen into the sitting room and came back with his accordion. He pushed his chair away from the supper table and his unused plate, sat down, and played 2 or 3 chords and then a run of high notes. "Could I trouble you for a glass, miss?" Mr. Powers asked Cress. Mr. Powers, grandfather's hired man who lived in his own place, a lean-to built against the barn, was eating supper with them this evening by special invitation from grandfather, though grandfather himself was not eating. He had come in, had seen the way the table was set, and what flowers were on it, and without a word had tossed the bowl outside. And now he was evidently going to play his accordion, perhaps even sing, and either seemed terrible to Cress. "And about 4 tablespoons of water in the bottom of the glass, miss, if it isn't too much trouble," said Mr. Powers. Cress took a tablespoon from the silver drawer, went to the sink, and started measuring the water into Mr. Powers's glass. It was her duty to be courteous to any guest of her grandfather's, but she did not care for Mr. Powers. He was odd to look at, red, wattled, and grizzled, and he frequently laughed when she said something serious, and she believed that except for him, her grandfather would not be behaving in so peculiar and unfeeling a way a few hours after grandmother's funeral. "Ah, don't measure it, miss," said Mr. Powers. "You'll give it a taste of medicine, measuring it out in a spoon that way." Cress, who had the 4 tablespoonfuls already in the glass, poured them back into the sink, filled the glass by guess to the height it had been before, then put it down in front of Mr. Powers. "That's more like it," said Mr. Powers. "Measurement's a sickening thing at best, and worst of all in a drink. A tittle of this and a tottle of that. A man who don't want to drink bad enough to take a chance on the measurement don't deserve it." He took a bottle from his coat pocket, pulled the cork with his teeth, and with no pretense of measurement, splashed a part of its contents in with the 4 tablespoons of water. "I don't ask you to join me, Hubert," he said, "knowing you never touch the stuff." "Tonight I'll change my mind," said Cress's grandfather, and without waiting for the glass that Cress had risen to get, he picked up Mr. Powers's bottle and drank from it. "Best thing in the world for you," said Mr. Powers. Cress's grandfather put down the bottle and said, "While you're up, Cress, take off that apron." Cress untied the apron, which had been her grandmother's, put it back in the apron drawer, and sat down once more at the supper table. And except that she had cried all the tears that were in her that morning, and that her mother had told her to be a comfort to her grandfather, she would have put her head down on the table and cried once more. The clock in the sitting room struck 7. Mr. Powers ate the corn pudding, pickled beets, and fried chicken the neighbors had brought in as cheerfully as though he were at a wedding party. Her grandfather had 2 more drinks from Mr. Powers's bottle, and played some more notes on his accordion, though no whole pieces yet. Cress watched the kitchen curtains with their borders of purple grapes, which her grandmother had stenciled on them, lift and fall in the warm evening air. She listened to a mockingbird singing as loudly as if the day were just beginning, and smelled the rich sweetness of the Marshall Neal roses that grew along the driveway outside of the kitchen windows. She had stood in the driveway, by the Marshall Neal bushes, while her mother, father, and grandfather, 3 people reluctant to part, had talked. She had not listened to them, but had looked at the sky. It was no longer clear as it had been in the morning, but was filmed over with a milky haze. A sudden gust of warm wind coming across the driveway as they stood there had broken one of the Marshall Neals apart and deposited its petals on the running board of the car, a little pink heap at the base of the fender. Her father had absently taken some of the petals in his hand. "Come on home with us for a few days," he had said to her grandfather. "Get away from here. That's the sensible thing to do." But her grandfather had shaken his head. "It's out of the question, John. Thanks just the same." "Are you sure you want Cress to stay, father?" her mother had asked. "Will she be of any help to you? She can brush out for you and cook a few simple things, but after all, she's only 13. "She'd be company," her grandfather had said. "Cress," her mother had said, "Cress, are you listening?" "Yes, mother, I'm listening," she had said, though she had been trying not to. "Do you want to stay, Cress? You don't have to, you know. Your grandfather doesn't want you staying and getting homesick and wishing you hadn't, do you, father?" Before her grandfather could speak, and because she was afraid that if she didn't speak quickly she would show how much she wanted to go home, she had said, "Of course I want to stay. Besides, it's all been decided." It was after her father and mother were in the car and the engine running that her mother had leaned out to speak to her alone. "Be a comfort to your grandfather, Crescent." Be a comfort to her grandfather? What comforting did he need, taking drinks from Mr. Powers's bottle, and shamefully, Cress thought, playing the beginnings of pieces on his accordion? He had played enough of "When It's Apple Blossom Time in Normandy" for her to recognize it. Mr. Powers recognized it too. "I always liked that song, Hubert," he said. "Spring's the best season of the year," said her grandfather. "Some people prefer fall," said Mr. Powers. "Fall can't hold a candle to spring. It's a matter of opinion, Hubert." "Not with me. It's a matter of fact with me. Every good thing that ever happened to me happened in the spring." Her grandfather spoke as if he expected to be disputed. But Mr. Powers did not dispute him. Instead, he emptied some more of his bottle into his glass. "Do you want 4 more tablespoons of water, Mr. Powers?" asked Cress politely. 3, 4, said Mr. Powers. "It don't matter, really." Cress let what she judged to be 3 or 4 tablespoons dribble into the glass from the faucet, and returned the glass to Mr. Powers. He tasted the mixture and nodded approvingly. "No spoon taste this time." Cress looked away from both men with shame, but particularly she looked away from her grandfather. She did not like Mr. Powers, but he was no responsibility of hers. Let him do what he wanted to. This was not a special day to him, as it was to her grandfather. It was almost dark, but she did not intend to turn on the lights. If this playing and drinking and arguing about the seasons of the year was to go on, let it go on in the dark, as hidden and secret as possible. After the car with her father and mother in it had left the driveway, she had heard its motor for a minute or 2, though the car itself was out of sight. And after its sound had faded away, a small cloud of yellow dust had hung above the road down which the car was traveling, and which the orange groves hid. Then there was nothing at all. No sound, no dust cloud. She and her grandfather were absolutely alone. It was as if a clock that had been furiously ticking had suddenly run down, and time, which had been tangled up in its mechanism, had been able at last to escape. Cress had felt its heavy everlastingness settle down upon her and her grandfather. This was the moment, after Cress's parents had left her behind for a visit, when in the past her grandmother had often said, "Now that we're rid of those two, how about something good to eat?" As if losing those two were no occasion for homesickness, but something her grandmother, her grandfather, and herself had looked forward to, and could take advantage of with all kinds of treats and feastings. So when her father and mother had driven off at last, after the funeral, Cress had looked up at her grandfather and said, "How about something good to eat now that we're rid of those two?" Her grandfather had given a kind of shudder, and had bent his head down toward her as if he had just returned from a distance, and were surprised to find her beside him. "Is it time to eat?" he said. "It's time for supper." "I suppose we have to eat," he had answered. "Call me when you're ready." She had gone into the kitchen, but had not started supper at once. Instead, she had stood for some time in the center of the warm, shadowy room, looking about. It was harder for her to believe that her grandmother was dead than that she was still alive and likely to step into the kitchen at any time, tying her frilled, supper-getting apron about her waist, saying, "Well, lovey, want to peel some potatoes for me?" and giving her a quick, laughing hug, perhaps, as she added, "Try to save me a little core of potato for cooking when you peel them, Crescent. A little sliver at the center we can eat." But tonight the kitchen had remained silent, empty, no voice, no footfall, no movement except the occasional lift and fall of the curtains in the warm air of the summer evening. There had been no real cooking to do. Cress had put the water on for her grandfather's tea, had set the corn pudding in the oven to heat, and filled a platter with cold fried chicken. It was a good thing she had filled the platter high, for Mr. Powers was eating now as he drank, without counting. Cress counted, though. There were already 5 bones on his plate, and they were not wing bones either. Mr. Powers saw her eyes counting and said, "It's been some time since I had fried chicken." Cress stopped looking at Mr. Powers's plate, but said nothing. "Once I drove down a road arched over for a quarter of a mile with blossoming lindens," her grandfather said. "Drove it in a horse and buggy. I don't recollect ever again smelling so much sweetness at one time. We turned around and drove the length of it once more, just for the sake of the smell. This in the springtime, Hubert?" Cress turned her mind away from such talk, and thought instead of the preparations she had made for this supper. While the water for her grandfather's tea had heated, she had set the table. She had set it as her grandmother would have done, cups and saucers on the left-hand side. Her grandmother had been left-handed, and had never been able to convince herself that a table set in this way was not more convenient for everyone. Cress had tied one of her grandmother's frilled aprons about her waist, and then, in order that the room should speak of her grandmother in every possible way, she had picked geraniums and arranged them as her grandmother had always done. First a single circle of white geraniums around the outer edge of the bowl, inside that a double ring of pink, and finally, as the heart of the bouquet, a center knot of deep red. When everything was ready, she had called her grandfather in the very words her grandmother had always used. "Could you spare a few minutes for eating?" He had come in, but he had not eaten. And now he was playing another song, and Mr. Powers was pushing the bottle once more in his direction. Cress got up, said good night, and quickly ran up the dark stairs to her room. It was a room that her grandmother had arranged especially for her. A blue and white room, blue cornflowers on the white curtains, and bordering the white valance that hung from beneath the bedspread, a blue blotter on the white desk, and above the desk, a handful of peacock feathers, tied together with a big loop of blue satin ribbon. At the head of her bed hung a verse that had once belonged to her mother. Cress's grandmother not only had written it, but had burned it onto a wooden plaque with a kind of needle she had for such work. It said, "Sleep well, sweet child, and may the night prepare you for eternal light. Sleep well, sweet child, and when you pray, ask God to guide you on your way." Cress read it through once again, though she knew it by heart. She went over to the south window and looked out into the summer night. There was another long quaver from the accordion downstairs, and hearing it, she unlatched the screen and stepped out, as she had often done before, onto the gentle slope of the roof. She sat down, wiped away her tears, and saw that the film that earlier had covered the sky had disappeared. The moon was shining, and the white oil tanks that topped the distant hills were softly luminous. She sat for a long time trying to understand her grandfather, and when she heard the screen behind her creak, she said joyfully, "Grandfather?" "No," said Mr. Powers. "It's not your grandpa, it's me." He came cautiously down the roof to where Cress was and sat down. "This is a nice place to sit on a summer night," he observed. "A nice view of hill and dale." "Yes," said Cress, thinking that it had been a nice place until Mr. Powers came out. "I guess your grandpa throwing out your flowers after you fixed 'em so nice kinda hurt your feelings." Cress said nothing. "You got to always remember with him," said Mr. Powers, "that he's hasty. Act first and think second. That's your grandpa's motto." "They were his flowers," said Cress, "and his bowl. He had a right to throw them out if he wanted to." Mr. Powers leaned over and scanned Cress's face in the moonlight. "Made you cry, though," he said. "Made you sad." "I wasn't crying for myself." "For your grandma?" "No," said Cress, though she didn't want to talk to Mr. Powers at all. "For him." "Your grandpa?" "Yes," said Cress, not remembering or caring, arguing and playing music. "Oh," said Mr. Powers. After a little while he added, "Why, Cress, he was talking about your grandma the whole time." "I heard him," said Cress, not wanting to be reminded of her. Mr. Powers started once or twice to speak, then stopped. Finally he said, "I once knew a man, a soldier. He came as near being blown to pieces as a man can and still live. That man couldn't even say the word for what had happened to him, let alone look at the places he was wounded. He was hurt too bad." "My grandfather was never a soldier," said Cress obstinately. Mr. Powers paid no attention to this. "There was another man, a soldier, got himself a scratch on the arm, nothing to speak of, and he was sliding down his bandages every few minutes to have a look at his hurt. He thought it was so interesting." Cress gazed without speaking across the tops of the moonlit groves. "You understand what I've been saying, Cress, about your grandpa?" "I don't need anyone to explain my own grandfather to me," said Cress stiffly. "Well, I suppose not." Mr. Powers got up slowly and awkwardly. "You look more like your grandma every day," he said. "I don't forget her either," said Cress. At this, Mr. Powers lifted the screen and stepped inside. "I put you a drumstick and a pickled meat on your dresser. I noticed you didn't eat your supper." "I don't feel like eating, thank you," Cress said, and then listened as Mr. Powers went slowly down the stairs. She sat for a long time after he had gone, her cheek resting against her drawn-up knees, her mind, she believed, perfectly empty. After a while she got up and climbed back into her room. She picked up the drumstick and pickled beet Mr. Powers had brought her, and stood before her window eating them. She could see Mr. Powers in his lean-to, outlined against the glass of the front door, rocking steadily in the chair that her grandmother had given him. Then, as if he could see her, and would think her eating a contradiction of all she had said, she told him, "I'm not forgetting Grandma, Mr. Powers, and I never, never will forget her." Chapter 4 13 Summer, Part 2. It was a hot August Saturday, 6:30 in the morning, and Mr. and Mrs. Delahanty still lingered at the breakfast table. 6:30 is mid-morning for a rancher in summer, but Mrs. Delahanty hadn't finished talking about the hat. "It's perfectly clear why she wants it," she said. It wasn't perfectly clear to Mr. Delahanty. Besides, he thought it would be interesting to know what one woman thinks of another's reasons for buying a hat, even though the second is only 13 and her daughter. "Why?" he asked. "Edwin," said Mrs. Delahanty. Mr. Delahanty put down his coffee, which was too hot anyway for a hot morning. "Edwin?" he exclaimed. "Oh, yes," Mrs. Delahanty assured him. Mr. Delahanty decided to drink his coffee. After drinking, he asked, "How does the hat figure in it?" "I think Cress thinks this hat would make Edwin see her in a new light, frail and feminine." "Better let her have it, hadn't you?" asked Mr. Delahanty. "Not that I like the idea of encouraging Edwin in any way." "This hat," Mrs. Delahanty said, "wouldn't encourage anyone. This hat—" "Oh, Cress!" she cried. "Don't slip around that way. You gave me a start. What are you doing up at this hour of the day anyway?" During summer vacation, Cress, unless she had projects of her own afoot, had to be routed from bed. "I couldn't sleep," she said. She could tell from their faces that they had been talking about her. "And I wanted to ask Father something before he went out to work." She sat down at the table and turned toward her father, as if they were two together, though seated unfortunately at a table with a stranger. "Can I call the store and tell them that if they'll hold the hat, you'll come in and look at it with me when we go to town tonight?" "I've looked at it, Cress," said her mother. "Mother," said Cress very sweetly, "I was speaking to Father. May I?" "You don't have to ask permission of me, Cress, to speak to your father." "Thank you, Mother," said Cress. "May I, Father?" "Well," said Mr. Delahanty, "I don't suppose there'd be any harm in taking a look. Would there, Gertrude? Though you mustn't count on me for any expert advice about a hat, Cress." Cress leaned toward her father. "Daddy," she said. She hadn't called her father Daddy for years, but somehow the word seemed right and natural to her this morning. "Daddy, if you thought a hat was beautiful and becoming, I'd know it was beautiful and becoming. Or if you thought it was ugly and unsuitable, I'd know it was ugly and unsuitable. Do you know what, Daddy?" Cress said, and leaned toward her father, admiring the philosophic lines, which ran not from his nose to his mouth, and which she thought made people look sour, but from his cheekbone to his jawbone. "Do you know what?" "No, Cress," said Mr. Delahanty, "I don't, but I'm waiting to be told." "I think you probably have instinctive taste." Mrs. Delahanty laughed, quite loud and long for so early in the morning. Cress looked at her mother with a mingling of shock and disapproval on her face. "Were you laughing at me or Daddy, Mother?" she asked politely. "The two of you," said Mrs. Delahanty. "You and your daddy. Your daddy, Cress, can't tell a bonnet from a bushel basket. Not if the basket has a flower on it, anyway." "Well, Gertrude," said Mr. Delahanty, "I may not be an expert on hats, I grant you that. But I think I know a pretty hat when I see one." "That's why I want you to see this hat, Daddy," said Cress. "It's so downright beautiful." "That hat, Cress," said her mother, "is the most unsuitable object for a girl of 13 years to put on her head I ever laid my eyes on." "Just what do you mean by unsuitable, Gertrude?" asked Mr. Delahanty. "I mean that hat was never intended for a 13-year-old girl. It's for an older woman," concluded Mrs. Delahanty, wasting irony. Mr. Delahanty poured himself a glass of milk. "You mean it ties under the chin?" he asked. Or has—" He took a drink of milk, visibly running out of what suggested to him the hat of an older woman. "Or has a black veil?" Cress helped him. "No," said Mrs. Delahanty, "it hasn't got a black veil, and it doesn't tie under the chin, but every single other thing on this earth that hat has got." "Now, Gertrude," said Mr. Delahanty, "maybe you'd just better tell me what this hat is really like." Mrs. Delahanty had a musing look in her eyes. "John, do you remember the Chamber of Commerce dinner last fall in Santa Ana?" "I remember we were there." "Do you remember the table decorations?" "No," said Mr. Delahanty. "I can't say I remember the table decorations." "Well, it's a pity you can't, because then you would know what this hat looks like." Cress did not like the way her mother had of being funny about serious matters. It was objectionable in anyone, in any mature person, that is, and particularly so in a mother. "When I have a child," Cress thought, "I'll be serious and understanding the rest of my days." "The table decorations," said Mrs. Delahanty reminiscently, "were horns of plenty made out of straw mats, and out of them came spilling every grain, fruit, and flower ever grown in Orange County. Cress's hat would look right at home on that table." "Oh, Mother!" cried Cress. "Except," said Mrs. Delahanty, "that those horns of plenty were of natural-colored straw, while this hat—" She paused, searching the room for some object with which to compare it. "While this hat," she concluded, "is an indescribable color." "Oh, Mother!" cried Cress again, "it isn't. It's flamingo red." "I've always considered red a nice warm color," said Mr. Delahanty. "This is the warmest red, if it is red," agreed Mrs. Delahanty, "you ever laid eyes on. And its size!" Once again, Mrs. Delahanty's eyes searched the kitchen without finding a comparable object. "It's just unbelievable," she said, shaking her head. "Which all adds up to saying, I gather," said Mr. Delahanty, "that this hat Cress wants is large and flowered. Is that right, Cress? Is that the way it strikes you?" The way the hat struck Cress was so overwhelming that she felt she might search the whole world over and still not find any word, any comparison, which would explain the way she felt about it. The hat was summertime. It was deep and broad like summer. It caused soft scallops of shadow, like summer shadows under the densest trees, to fall across her face. It was like a poem. Yes, it was as much "the rose is in full bloom, the riches of Flora are lavishly strown," as though Keats, when he wrote, had been thinking of it. The person wearing it would be languorous, gentle, and delicate. Looking at herself in the store mirror with the hat on, she had heard herself saying to Edwin, "If you'll be kind enough to give me your arm, I think I'd like to stroll a little before the dew comes out." And she had seen how she would look, saying that, glancing appealingly upward at Edwin from under the brim of the shadow-casting, summery, flower-laden hat. "Well, Cress?" asked her father. "Oh, yes," said Cress, "that's how it strikes me. May I call the store and say you'll come in tonight to look at it?" "There's no rush, is there?" asked Mr. Delahanty. "Could look Monday as well as tonight, couldn't we?" "The rush," said Cress, "is because I want to wear it to the beach tomorrow. That is, if you approve of it, Daddy." "What's the idea, Cress?" asked her father. "A hat to the beach? You usually put your bathing cap on before we leave the house." "Tomorrow," said Cress, "I'm not going to go thrashing about in the water. I'm going to walk about and observe." "You're not going to be able to observe much, Cress," said her mother, "with that hat hanging down over your eyes." Cress ignored this. "Father, may I or may I not call the SQR? You don't have to promise to buy it or like it, only to look at it." "I guess looking never did any harm," said Mr. Delahanty. "Now you've gone and done it," said Mrs. Delahanty, when Cress had gone. "Done what?" asked Mr. Delahanty innocently. "Promised her that monstrosity. And all in the world she wants it for is to parade around Balboa in it tomorrow, hoping Edwin will catch sight of her. Is Edwin at Balboa? His family is, and as far as I know they haven't abandoned him. I didn't promise to buy the hat, protested Mr. Delahanty. All I said I'd do was look at it. Wearing the hat, Cress felt just as she had known she would. Gentle and fragile and drooping. Beautiful, too. Running with it on would be utterly out of the question. Even sitting with it on had its difficulties, for the hat with its burden of fruits and flowers had to be balanced just so. "Father," she called from the back seat, "will you please roll up your window? It's blowing my hat." "Cress," said Mr. Delahanty, "it's at least 90 in here now, and I'm not going to roll this window up another inch. We're barely getting enough fresh air to keep us alive as it is." "It's blowing the flowers off my hat," cried Cress. "A few will never be missed," said Mr. Delahanty. Mrs. Delahanty leaned across her husband and rolled up his window. "How I could signal if the need suddenly arose, I don't know," Mr. Delahanty told her, "apart from the fact that I'm suffocating right now." "Nonsense," said Mrs. Delahanty. "Besides, we'll be there in a few minutes." "Steer for me for a minute, will you, Gertrude?" asked Mr. Delahanty. "I want to get out of this coat before I have a heat stroke." How ridiculous! Cress felt just right. Warm, summery warm, of course. But though the car windows were tightly closed, she could feel the freshness of the sea breeze which was bending the brown grass by the roadside, shaking the palm fronds, ruffling the white leghorns' tails up over their backs like untidy skirts. She could smell the strange salt freshness of the sea, the far non-land scent of its never-quiet water, and suddenly, in a little gap between two brown hills, she saw the sea itself, blue in the hot air, rippling and glinting under the sun like the scales of big silver-blue fish. Cress sighed so deeply with pleasure that her hat rocked unsteadily, and she righted it, holding it for a minute with both hands at just the angle which she hoped it would have when Edwin saw her. Because Edwin would see her, of course. It was impossible to believe that she, having become the owner of the most beautiful hat, should be in the same town with Edwin without his seeing it and her. After her father parked the car, he got out his own and her mother's bathing suits. Then the two of them stood for a time looking at her. "Well, times change," said Mr. Delahanty. "Times change. I never thought I'd live to see the day, Cress, when you'd elect to tramp up and down the boardwalk on a hot day, instead of going swimming with us." "I'm going to walk and observe," said Cress, holding on to her hat, which was hard to control in the stiff sea breeze which was blowing. "I'm getting a little old for just sporting around in the water." "Observe," said Mr. Delahanty, seriously regarding her. "I can only hope, Cress, the shoe won't be too decidedly on the other foot." "Now, John," said Mrs. Delahanty. And though she wasn't ordinarily a mother much given to kissing, she managed to get sufficiently under the brim of Cress's hat to give her a loving kiss. "You're all right, Crescent," she said. "That hat's a little unusual, but I don't know that I'd want a daughter of mine rigged out like everyone else. Have a good time, and I hope you see Edwin." "Oh, Mother," said Cress earnestly, for the knowledge of her mother's understanding was as comforting to her as confession after sin. "Run on now," said Mrs. Delahanty. "We'll meet you at Tiny's at 4, said her father, "and have some ice cream before we go home." At first, Cress was so certain of seeing Edwin that she walked along the boardwalk, really observing and truly, except for the difficulties she had keeping her hat righted, enjoying the sights and smells of the town and the sea. Now and then, in front of a plate-glass window, which served her as mirror, she stopped to admire her hat, to get it on straight again, and to poke up the stray hairs which kept dangling down from her not very solid kid-curler curls. Her mother had tried to persuade her not to wear a middy and a skirt, saying they didn't go well with her hat. She was glad she hadn't listened to her. A middy was a nautical costume, and what, unless you actually went to sea, was more nautical than the shore? And her hat was the heart of summer. And where was the heart of summer to be found, if not in August at the beach? No. Looking at herself in the plate-glass windows she passed, she was very content with what she saw. Under the large hat, her neck looked slender and reed-like, a blossom stem. Her eyes were shadowed, her entire aspect gentle, and even, she thought, mysterious. She was glad she had worn her high-heeled patent leather pumps, too. They made her teeter a little, but a swaying gait, she thought, suited the day, the hat, and her own personality, besides denying in the sharpest way possible the tomboy she was afraid Edwin thought her, and who would no doubt have worn sneakers. What with observing, keeping her hat on straight, and practicing on occasional strangers, the look of melting surprise with which she planned to greet Edwin, the first hour went by quickly. After the quietness of the ranch, where a whole day often passed with no other sounds than her own and her father's and mother's voices, and where the chief diversions perhaps were those of digging up a trapdoor spider or freeing a butcher-bird's victim, the sights and sounds of a beach town were almost too exciting to be borne. First there was the strange light touch of the penetrating wind off the sea on her warm inland body. Then there was the constant, half-heard beat of the surf, hissing as it ran smoothly up the sand, thundering as it crashed against the rocks of the breakwater. There were all the smells of salt and seaweed, of fish and water and wind. There were all the human smells, too, of the hundreds of people who filled the boardwalk. Ladies in print dresses smelling like passing gardens, swimmers with their scents of suntan oils and skin lotions. There were the smells of the eating places, of mustard and onions, of hamburgers frying, and the sharp sudden smell of stacks of dill pickles, as brisk in the nose as a sudden unintended inhalation of seawater. There was the smell of frying fish from the many fish grottos, and outside these places, in the middle of the boardwalk, like miniature landlocked seas, the glass tanks, where passers-by might admire the grace and color of their dinners before eating them. It was hard to say who did the most looking, fish outward from these sidewalk aquariums, at the strange pale gill-less pedestrians, or pedestrians inward at the finny swimmers. Cress liked them both, solemn fish and passers-by, some also solemn, with problems sun and water had not made them forget. For the first hour, this was enough for Cress, being a part of this abundance, and knowing that at any minute she would see Edwin. For in a town of one street, how could she miss him? Then suddenly the first hour was gone by. It was past 3, and already the wind seemed a little sharper, the sun less bright, the boardwalk less crowded. More of her hair had come uncurled. Her hat took more riding to keep it straight. Her neck ached from holding her head high enough to see out from under the hat's brim. Occasional stabs of pain shot up the calves of legs unaccustomed to the pull of high heels. A thought, with the swiftness of a stone dropping through water, settled in her mind. He isn't coming. It was a possibility she had not even thought about before. She had thought he would have to come. The hat was for him. The day was for him. How could she possibly, without seeing him, meet her father and mother, say yes, say no, eat ice cream, get in the car, go home, take off her hat, go to bed, sleep? It was 15 after 3. At first, she had been willing that Edwin see her first. Now she searched every figure, every slight, short man or boy's figure, for as great a distance as she could make them out, saying, "Be Edwin." So strongly did she will it, that she thought she might, by determination alone, transform a stranger into Edwin. It was 3:30. It was 15 of 4. Her hat was on one side, her mouth weary from practicing her smile on strangers, her pleat out of her freshly starched skirt, her feet mere stumps of pain. Still she would not give up. "Edwin, appear! Edwin, appear!" she willed. Edwin did appear! Crossing the street a block away, small and neat and thin in white duck pants and a white shirt, he crossed and turned toward Cress, walking steadily toward her. In 2 minutes or 3 he would see her, and see the hat and notice her new gentleness. All tiredness and pain left Cress. She could very easily have flown, or played a piece she had never seen before on the piano, or kissed a mad dog and not been bitten. She had just time to arrange herself, resettle her hat, give her now completely uncurled hair a quick comb upward. To do this, she took her hat off, stood on tiptoe, and with fingers which trembled with excitement, managed to get it up onto the top of one of the rectangular glass aquariums, which by chance stood conveniently before her in the middle of the sidewalk. Before she herself understood what had happened, someone was jovially yelling, "Hey, sis, breadcrumbs is what you feed 'em." And there was her hat, slowly, gracefully, settling among the startled fish of the aquarium. The man who had yelled was a short, fat man, wearing pants but no shirt or undershirt. He had sand in the hair on his chest like dandruff, Cress thought wildly, unable for shame to raise her eyes to his face. "What's the idea, sis?" he asked. Forcing her eyes away from the sandy dandruff, Cress saw that her hat, still, gradually, gracefully floundering, was bleeding flamingo red into the aquarium, so that the amazed fish now swam in sunset waters. "I thought it had a top," she whispered to no one in particular. "The hat, sis?" asked the shirtless man. "The glass place for the fish," Cress whispered. "I thought it had a top." "It didn't, sis." "I was resting my hat on it," Cress whispered, "while I fixed my hair." "You was resting your hat on air, sis." "It dropped," said Cress. "It fell right out of my hands." "Gravity, sis," said the fat man. "It was gravity." "Will it make the fish sick?" asked Cress. "Make 'em die, sis, in my opinion. Make 'em all throw up their shoestrings, I should think." "What'll I do?" asked Cress. "Watch 'em die," said the fat man comfortably. "That big one's a goner already." Cress wanted to die herself. She willed it very hard, but she couldn't. She couldn't even faint, though she held her breath and willed her heart to stop beating. But a sort of numbness did come over her, making all the voices blurred and indistinct, making all the people, and there were dozens, hundreds it seemed to Cress, now pressed about the aquarium, distant and hazy. It was a field day for fish and humans. It was a great occasion for fish, who had had nothing more exciting to look forward to than death in the frying pan. A big blunt-nosed fish swam at the hat as if to ram it. Smaller fish circled it curiously. Nervous fish parted the darkening waters in a fishy frenzy. It was a glorious moment for humans, too, a sight they had never expected to see. Someone, a worthy man dedicated to service, brought out the fish grotto proprietor. He came in his white apron and tall chef's hat, brandishing a long-handled ladle, and happy at first to see his fish arousing so much interest. He shouldered his way through the crowd, his bloodshot eyes bright with pleasure, until he caught sight of vermilion waters, frantic fish, and the heart of summer, still partially afloat among them. He had had a long, hard day frying fish. This was the last straw. Fish dying without frying. "In goodness' name," he cried sadly, "who is murdering my fish?" Cress was too frightened to reply. "She is," said the fat man, pointing. "Sis here done it." "What does she mean?" the fish grotto proprietor cried. Cress opened her mouth, but not a sound came out. She was as speechless as the fish. "Sis here was resting her hat on top of the aquarium," explained the fat man. "There ain't no top," said the fish grotto owner. "Is she blind?" "More or less, I reckon," said the fat man. "You kind of blind, sis?" he asked kindly. Cress was able only to moan a little, with a long shudder, like a capsized ship coming to rest. Her hat settled to the bottom of the aquarium. It lay there at a crazy angle, one side held up by a small castle, with which the fish grotto proprietor had attempted to give his aquarium a romantic, Gothic air. Out of a castle window, one frightened fish-eye peered, trying to penetrate the murky waters. Make out if this was the end of the world for fish. It looked to be. Flowers and fruits were now adding their colors to that of the flamingo-red straw. Streaks of purple from pansies and violets, puffs of sulphurous yellow from the daisies, veins of green from stems and flowers richly marbled the general red of the waters. And the hat, in form as well as color, was suffering a sea change. It was softening up, flattening out. Each minute it looked less and less like a hat. Cress finally found her voice. "Save my hat," she whispered. "It's too late," the fish grotto proprietor said, "to speak of saving anything. Hat or fishes, they're all goners. Let 'em die together." "Die?" asked Cress. "Poisoned," said the fish proprietor, pointing to his frantic fish, the vari-colored water. "What you got against fish, kid?" "I like fish," Cress whispered. "She likes fish," said the fat man. "Hate to consider what she might do if she didn't." Those who had gathered about the aquarium laughed. Somewhere among them must be Edwin, Cress thought, seeing her face trembling with the effort not to cry, seeing her beautiful hat, its colors fading out, amongst an aquarium full of fish. The laughter was not malicious. It was lazy Sunday afternoon laughter. Lazy Sunday afternoon laughers, watching as if at a play, to see what the fish proprietor would do, if he were hero or villain, straight man or clown. But it might as well have been malicious. It shamed Cress to the bone. It was unthinkable that anyone, after such public humiliation, could live. She would do nothing wild nor dramatic, simply refuse food, fade quietly away, die. "Poisoned," declared the fish proprietor again gloomily. "Deliberately poisoned." "I think you're mistaken about their being poisoned." It was impossible, Cress thought, that anyone should be defending her, let alone Edwin. Edwin, who was always a victim himself. "I think that color is probably from pure vegetable dyes," said Edwin. Edwin's face was as white as his shirt, and Cress could see that his upper lip trembled. But he was defending her, defying the fish grotto proprietor, not ashamed to be on the side of a person who had been publicly laughed at. "It might even be good for the fish," suggested Edwin, "that pure vegetable dye." "Good for them!" cried the fish proprietor. "Them fish have been scared to death at the very least, poison or no poison. Hat's descending on them. I wouldn't feed them fish to a cat, now. Their nervous systems have been shook up. You related to this girl?" "No," said Edwin. "Well, someone," said the fish proprietor, coming to the crux of the matter, "has got to pay for my ruined fish." "That'll be me, I reckon," said Mr. Delahanty, who, without enthusiasm, was pushing his way through the crowd. He took the ladle from the fish owner's hand, and being a tall man was able, by stretching a little, to fetch up the hat, heavy and dripping from the bottom of the aquarium. He held the hat toward Cress, who, without a word, took it. Then Mr. Delahanty handed the ladle back to its owner. "I'll pay $10, he said. "25, said the fish grotto proprietor. "Not a cent less. Those were fancy fish and not to be picked up every day in the week." 11, said Mr. Delahanty. "I was fond of those fish," said their owner. "They were pets, so to speak." 11.50, said Mr. Delahanty. "It was cruelty to animals putting that hat in with them. I could turn you into the SPCA. 12, said Mr. Delahanty. They settled for 15, Mr. Delahanty getting the fish. Cress, the hat, and the fish in an oversized kettle loaned by the fishman occupied the back of the car on the trip home. It was a slow trip, because speed tended to slosh the water in the kettle, together with a fish or two, out on the floor. It was a silent trip because Cress was thinking, and because up in the front seat, while Mr. and Mrs. Delahanty had plenty to say, they didn't want to be overheard by Cress. They were nearly home before Mrs. Delahanty said very low, "What a terrible thing to happen! It might mark her emotionally for life." Mr. Delahanty agreed. "It wouldn't have been so bad, though, if that Edwin hadn't had to turn up in time to see it all." "I know. She wanted to be such a lady for him. That hat, and the curls, and then the hat in with the fish, the curls all gone, and all those people laughing. I'm a grown person, John, but I just don't think I could live down such a thing. I think I might just stick my head in that bucket of fish and end everything." As if her own words had put an idea into her mind, Mrs. Delahanty looked quickly around. "Cress!" she cried. "What have you got that hat on your head for?" "It'll shrink if I don't," said Cress very calmly. "Well, let it. Let it shrink. And you've got all those colors dribbling down your face and neck." "I'm trying to keep them mopped up," said Cress, mopping some more. "Throw that hat away," ordered Mrs. Delahanty. "Toss it out the window, Cress. You don't ever have to wear it again. We'll get you a new one." "Oh, no," cried Cress. "I love it. I'm going to keep it all my life." "Keep it all your life?" Mrs. Delahanty asked, feeling rather dazed. "Cress, that hat didn't look too good in the first place. I can't begin to tell you what it looks like now. Throw it away." "No," said Cress stubbornly. "I want to keep it to remember today by." "Remember today?" repeated Mrs. Delahanty, who was beginning to feel increasingly that she and her daughter were not speaking of the same day at all. "Why in the world do you want to remember today?" "Because of the brave way Edwin defended me," said Cress. "Oh," said Mrs. Delahanty faintly. "He was really wonderful, Mother. He defied that man." "I'm afraid we missed that, Cress." "And I was stricken, Mother, really stricken. It was the first time Edwin ever saw me stricken. He didn't even know I could be. He's always been the stricken one so far. The most I dared hope for was to be gentle." "Then," said Cress, with great satisfaction, "Ha! Stricken!" There was complete silence in the car for some time. "Don't you think I was, Mother?" Cress asked anxiously. "Yes," said Mrs. Delahanty with conviction. "I think that's about the word for it." "And whenever I wear this hat, he'll remember." Mrs. Delahanty took her husband's handkerchief from his pocket and handed it back to her daughter. "Tuck this around your neck, Cress. It'll keep those colors from staining your middy." With one hand, Cress tucked the handkerchief about her neck. With the other, she kept her hat in place. This is your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Stories Come to Life. Be sure to join us next time when we continue to listen to Cress Delahanty by Jessamyn West. I'd love to hear from you, so please send me an email to kluker@marshallpl.org. I'll talk to you again soon.